Hey everybody, it's Long Turtle here, and we are going to be doing a video today on 5 killer tips for beginning killers. This is people who are just getting into killer or have only played a few games with killer. So tip number 1 is going to be 3-genning. There are 7 generators on the level, and obviously the survivor's objective is to repair these. So finding survivors, generally patrolling generators, is going to be an easy way to find some of them. As they start to do generators, you want to pay attention to the level and which generators are kind of far off in the outskirts. You'll notice that in each level there is a concentration of more gens in one area and then some kind of scattered throughout. It is a very smart idea and really an objective to go for in every game to kind of patrol those cluster generators, and hopefully by the end, when there's one generator left, you will have 3 generators that are all close to one another, be it in some type of small line or a triangle, as it normally ends up being. What this does is the survivors are still going to have to do one of these 3 gens, but since they're in such close proximity to one another, you will have a much easier time patrolling and applying pressure to the survivors. This is something that can take a little bit of practice because there's a lot of pressure and frustration that can grow when you're watching 2 gens pop in the first, 2 to 3 minutes of the game. But if they're ones in the outskirts, don't sweat it. Just keep patrolling the generators that are in a cluster, and by the time they get down to one generator, you'll find, oh hey, I can see all 3 of these from standing in this one spot. I know that those 2 are working on that generator over there, and this person's working on this one. You'll find it a much easier time once you start to look at the game in that way, and not just running around randomly from gen to gen trying to stop people from doing all of them. Tip number 2 is knowing when to break off from a chase. Lots of times in the beginning, you'll see killers chasing people around in circles, getting hit with 4 or 5 pallets in one chase, following people into extremely powerful loops, and before you know it, they finally down the person, only to have 3 to 4 generators already done. When you find yourself in a situation where somebody seems to really know what they're doing, be it knowing the map and taking you to different jungle gyms or finding a really powerful loop that you can't seem to get them, don't continue to follow that person. You can always break off from the chase, go find some other survivors. There's 3 other ones that are on gens. You're definitely going to run into one that is not as good at looping as the person that was leading you around, and you'll be able to down them faster. Tip number 3 is perks. As a killer, you will start out with universal perks that you can get in your blood web as you level up one of the killers, along with the 3 perks that are specific to the killer you're starting with. You can use whatever killer you want available to you, try a few and see which style you like. I'm not going to talk about their perks specifically in this video, but the starting perks, the detection ones that you can have available to you, are Bitter Murmur and Whispers. These will allow you to find survivors more often and can very much help a new player to kind of track them down in the beginning, as you won't really have the experience to know the movements of survivors and where they're going to go all the time. If you want to spend a little bit of money as you start to build up teachable perks from other killers, I would highly suggest that you pick up the Cannibal, who has Barbecue and Chili, which is an amazing detection perk that also gives you bonus blood points for hooking people, and the Nurse's Calling, which is leveled up from the Nurse, which allows you to see injured survivors that are healing. Outside of detection perks, beginning universal perk that is also very helpful and can slow the game down for the survivors, allowing you more time to find them, is Sloppy Butcher, which makes it take longer for survivors to heal. This is a very useful perk when you're starting out, and also certain builds when you've already been playing for a while. The last thing I want to talk about with perks is No One Escapes Death, also affectionately known as NOED. This perk seems extremely powerful and can be in many circumstances, and what it does is, at the end of the game, when all the generators are done, if there is a dull totem on the map, it will become a hex totem for no one escapes death. This gives the exposed status effect to survivors so you can down them in one hit, and gives you a speed boost. The issue I have with using that, especially in the beginning, is that it can effectively reward killers after they've had a bad game, and it's not really going to make you a better killer. Because your goal as a killer, something you want to work towards, especially in the beginning, is learning how to loop, when to break off from chases, how to apply pressure, how to work towards the 3-gen. And if you lose at that, okay, that's fine. You're gonna lose some games. You gotta work on it. Everybody loses games. But when you have no ed, it can create a false sense of progress where you're like, oh well, I killed 2 or 3 people that game, but it was because of no ed. It's a skillless perk that is gonna just take up another perk slot that you could have used for a detection perk or a pressure perk or something more useful that could have helped you win out the generator game, instead of, oh, they did the generators and played a really awesome game against me and outplayed me, but I just have this perk that, yeah, die anyway. So I find it to be a pretty useless perk. I generally don't use it anymore and haven't in a long time. Alright, so tip number 4, some people may not think of really as a tip, but I do, and that is killer abilities. I think that killer abilities are something that are obviously the main power of killer, but a lot of people don't use them as much as they should. Giving an example, and I myself have been very guilty of this before, is you see somebody playing as Hillbilly and they start out the game, they chainsaw across the level, and you see a bunch of people run away, they try and chainsaw 1 or 2 people, they fail 2 or 3 times, and then almost the entire rest of the game, they just go around in R2/M1, just normal basic attacking people, and just kind of down them. They're getting hit by pallets, but they don't really use their chainsaw anymore. Same thing with Wraith. You see a lot of people will just sneak up on somebody, decloak, hit them once, and then they just chase that person, staying uncloaked the entire time until they down them, when they could have just cloaked again and snuck up on that person that was injured and caused a lot of chaos. So really practice the abilities of the killers that you're using and try and use their abilities as often as possible, even if it's causing you a little bit of frustration in the beginning and you're thinking to yourself, well, I could just basic attack everybody and do this, this, and that. Don't worry about that specific game. You're going to play tons of games. So just focus on honing your skills with the killer abilities, and eventually you will know exactly when you can and cannot hit somebody with an ability or where to place traps, etc. So tip number 5, and the last tip, is a kind of odd one that I don't see many people cover, but once again, another one that I think is pretty important, especially when you're starting out, can really help you, and that is avoid toxicity. As a killer, you're going to come up against a lot of survivors that are going to do things ranging from teabagging you, clicking flashlights, doing gestures at you. They'll body block you from hooks. Sometimes up to 2 to 3 people will body block you from hooks. They'll do a lot of very altruistic things that will bother you. And it can be frustrating, but at the same time, if you just take a deep breath, try not to let it bother you, and just keep playing, you'll find more often than not that you will be able to eventually play through those types of tactics and that type of toxicity. Now, as a killer, you also want to avoid being toxic yourself. The 2 most often seen things that people consider toxic with killer are tunneling and camping. Tunneling is when somebody gets off a hook and you ignore everybody else and just run after them and down them over and over, hook them again and again until they're dead. Which is pretty rude and not a super smart move more often than not, because while you're doing that, everybody else is just going to start rushing gens because they know you're going after that one person, and by the time you kill that one person and hook them 3 times, all the gens will be done. But it is okay to tunnel somebody if they get taken off of a hook, and by the time you get to the hook, that's the only person you see. You do not have to go around and, try and find somebody else. Now with camping, that's just referred to if you put somebody on a hook, you just stay at the hook and watch them die. This is something that is very, very frowned upon, but also really, really not smart, because once again, if you put somebody on a hook and just stay there, all the other people can just rush gens, and you might kill one person, but the other 3 people do 5 gens by that time and just leave. But there's the exception. It is perfectly fine to stay at a hook if you see that there are other survivors near that person, or if somebody gets you to chase them, but they're looping you where the hooked survivor is. You don't have to just leave. You're not considered toxic at that point. So those are 2 things to just keep in mind. Just don't sit there and stare at somebody at a hook if you can go after other people and there's nobody else around. And if you're going to tunnel somebody, only do it if they're the only target that you actually see. If there's other people you could actually hit, it's much smarter and generally buys you more time, really, to injure as many people as possible. Those are my 5 beginner's tips for Killer. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. If you found this video informative or enjoyed it, feel free to hit the like button. There's a link in the description below to my Twitch. I stream Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, so feel free to stop by and hang out with us.